Age of Chaucer, starting from 1340 to 1400. This age was one of the ages of turmoil and social change. England was moving from the old medieval society of ignorance to the new world called Renaissance. So we see this time period going through many social, religious, and political changes. Three most important events that happened during this time period were: the first was the Hundred Years' War that started from 1337 and lasted up to 1453, which was going on between England and France and lasted for almost 116 years. As I told you in the previous age, the medieval period, that the enmity between England and France started from the Norman conquest in 1066 AD, when French king claimed English throne for himself. The second important event that affected the age of Chaucer was the Black Death or the bubonic plague, which started in 1348 and lasted till 1350. It wiped out nearly one-third of English population and significantly damaged the established medieval feudal system. Since most of the English population died in the plague, the demand and value for workers increased naturally. The third most important event that affected the socio-economic conditions in the age of Chaucer was the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Now, why did the peasants revolted? The Hundred Years' War and Black Death resulted in a financial crisis for the peasants and the working class. They were dying. The royal treasury was also depleting and the funds were being wiped out. So, to compensate for the rapidly depleting royal funds, the poll tax was imposed on all the peasants above the age of 15, irrespective of the fact that whether they are employed or not, irrespective of their ability to pay or not. So that's why the peasants revolted against the monarchy. And so in 1381, under the leadership of Wat Tyler, the peasants' revolt began. The peasants' revolt demanded abolition of serfdom, though later the revolt was crushed, but it brought significant changes to the feudal system in England, and a system of wages was set and unnecessary high taxation was also stopped. There were three kings that ruled during the age of Chaucer. And sometimes questions do come in the exams about who those three kings were. The first one was Edward III, who ruled from 1327 to 1377. Second was Richard II, 1377 to 1399. And the third was Henry IV, 1399 to 1413. Interestingly, Chaucer lived during the reign of all these three monarchs. So Chaucer saw the reign of all these three monarchs during his lifetime. Now, moving forward, let us now discuss the major authors of the age of Chaucer. The first one was Geoffrey Chaucer himself. Chaucer was born in 1340 in London. He is called the father of English literature. In his young age, Chaucer worked as a page or help boy or a courtier, as a civil servant, and also as a clerk to the king. John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, is usually regarded as Chaucer's patron, and Chaucer also wrote a poem, The Book of Duchess, a poem mourning the death of John of Gaunt's first wife, Blanche. Chaucer died in year 1400 and was buried in the Westminster Abbey, but later his remains were moved to a better tomb in an area now which is known as the Poet's Corner. He was the one who made the use of the heroic couplet in his work. The Legend of Good Women and also the Canterbury Tales, these all employ the heroic couplet. Chaucer also gave us a new rhyming scheme called as the Rhyme Royal. A rhyming stanza scheme consisted of 7 lines, usually in iambic pentameter. So that was a rhyming scheme discovered by Chaucer called Rhyme Royal. Now let us know about various works of Chaucer chronologically, starting from the very first work which he wrote. The first work that Chaucer wrote was the Book of Duchess. As I told you, it was written around 1369 to 1374, and the poem is an elegy. That means a tragic and mournful poem written on the death of someone dear. He wrote it on the death of Blanche, wife of the Duke of Lancaster, John of Gaunt. It is a poem written in form of dream allegory and is inspired from Roman de la Rose, a poem written in French by poets like Guillaume de Lorris and Jean de Meun. The second poem that Chaucer wrote was The Legend of Good Women. It was written in 1380s and it is a poem in dream vision That means a poem written as if it was a dream one had sometime. The poem talks about the life of 9 virtuous women from mythology and history and talks about their heroic deeds. The House of Fame is third poem by Chaucer, written around 1374 to 85, is again a poem in dream vision and is written in 3 books. This one is an octosyllabic couplet. The poem was inspired from the classical poets like Boccaccio, Ovid, Virgil's Aeneid and Dante's Divine Comedy. Many a times the question has come in the exam about what was the source of inspiration for Chaucer's book, Chaucer's poem, The House of Fame. So it was a poem inspired from poets or classical poets like Boccaccio, Ovid, Virgil and Dante, and especially Virgil's Aeneid and Dante's Divine Comedy were the source of inspiration for Chaucer behind writing his poem, The House of Fame. The main themes of this poem are power of poetry, process of poetry, etc. But the poem remained unfinished in his lifetime. So this was the work which was never completed by Chaucer since he died. The Parliament of Fowls is the 4th poem that Chaucer wrote in 1380s, and it was a marriage song written to celebrate the marriage of King Richard II with Anne of Bohemia in 1382. It is also in dream vision and it is written in rhyme royal stanza which Chaucer founded. The most important work of Chaucer is the Canterbury Tales, written in 1387 to 1400. The work is a collection of 24 stories. It is very important for the students to know the overall pattern of the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is in 2 parts. The first part is the prologue or the introduction of the poem, and then it is the rest of the poem called the Canterbury Tales. So the prologue is something which describes the overall structure of the poem, the characters in that poem and their trade, what they were planning to do. So all the plan that Chaucer had in mind for writing such a mammoth work of 24 stories was planned ahead and told to the readers in his prologue to the Canterbury Tales. So along with the poem, it is also important for us to know what included in the prologue or what things did Chaucer explain in the prologue. Now let us understand the overall plan and structure of the poem first, which is discussed by Chaucer in his prologue to the Canterbury Tales. The work is a collection of 24 stories that are over 17,000 lines and it is in heroic couplet. This was one of the main work of Chaucer written in Middle English and therefore it is regarded as one of the first great works of English literature. The poem is kind of a storytelling contest between various pilgrims who are on their way to the Canterbury in the month of April to pay their homage to the shrine of Saint Thomas Becket. On their way towards the Canterbury and on their way back, they are supposed to tell tales to each other so as they could pass the time well. But before that, all the pilgrims, they gather together at the Tabard Inn. Harry Bailey is the host of the Tabard Inn, where all the pilgrims, they gather together before they proceed for their journey towards the Canterbury. There the host suggests them that each pilgrim is supposed to tell tales on their journey and whosoever tells the best tale will be given free food and drink at the cost of all other pilgrims. Now there is a prologue, that is the opening of the poem, which tells the readers about the number of pilgrims and a bit about their lives in general. The first tale is told by the knight and the last tale is told by the parson. Chaucer's original plan was to let each pilgrim tell 2 tales on their way towards Canterbury and 2 tales on the way back, but the work remained unfinished and only 24 tales could be completed. Now there are people from all walks of life in Chaucer's Canterbury tale. Like some are from nobility, for example, knight and the squire are the people from nobility. And there are people from church like the nun, the nun's priest, the parson, etc. And then there are also commoners like the miller, the reeve, the municipal, etc. So basically there are people from 3 social groups in Canterbury: the nobility, the church and the commoner. So it is a mixed group who are going together to Canterbury to pay their homage. There are a few notable tales and the names of the pilgrims who told them, which is important for us to know from the exam point of view. So I'll tell you the names of the tale tellers and the tales told by them. So now I'll tell you the names of the people who told the tales and the names of the tales that they told to others. The first person to tell the tale was the knight. And knight told the story of Arcite and Palmon. Second tale was told by the miller, who told about the fableau of John the carpenter. The wife of Bath told the next tale, and it was the story of Alison. Then there was Pardoner's tale about death, then the friar's tale about summoner, and the clerk's tale of the story of Griselda, and the nun's priest tale about the story of cock and a fox, and then the parson's tale, who told the story of seven deadly sins. It is the only tale which is in prose. The rest of the tales are in poetic form. So the question comes in exams many a times, which tale was in prose. So we can say that the parson's tale was narrated in prose style. There were other pilgrims also who told tales. So you can also consider remembering the names of a few more pilgrims. For example, the merchant's tale, the shipman's tale, the prioress, the tale of Sir Thopas, tale of Melibee, the monk's tale, the nun's priest tale, the second nun's tale, the yeoman's tale, the municipal's tale, etc. Now let us discuss the other major authors of this period who were equally popular like Chaucer. The first one is John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe lived from 1328 to 1384. And he advocated the translation of the Bible into common vernacular, that is the commonly spoken language of the masses. Because earlier the Bible used to be only in Latin. He was the one who then translated the Vulgate's Bible into Middle English language called as Wycliffe's Bible, so that even the common people can read it. The second important author from this period is John Gower. John Gower was a friend of Chaucer, and he lived from 1330 to 1408, and he wrote poems like Confessio Amantis, which is also known as the Lover's Confession, and second one that he wrote is Vox Clementis, that means the voice of the one crying out, and the third one is named as Speculum Meditantis, which means mirror of meditation. The third important poet during this period was William Langland. William Langland lived from 1332 till 1386. He is known to have written the poem Piers Plowman, a dream allegory with religious themes. The full title of the poem is The Visions of William Concerning Piers the Plowman. He was also known as the Morning Star of Reformation because his poems inspired the Peasants' Revolt. The fourth important poet of this period was Sir John Mandeville, who lived from 1300 to 1371, and he wrote The Travels of Sir John Mandeville, a memoir written in French. It is a humorous account of Sir Mandeville's travels. There was also an anonymous poet who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which I have told you in the medieval time period as well. It is an alliterative poem, and three other poems written by this anonymous author are also there, which are named as The Pearl, The Patience, and Purity. Purity is also named as cleanliness. The other name for the purity is cleanliness. So we can say the Pearl, the Purity, and Patience were the three other poems written by this anonymous poet who is called as the Gawain poet, who is supposed to have written Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Though this poem is in alliterative mode, so it is more or less related to the medieval time period rather than the age of Chaucer. Other important English poets who were Chaucer's contemporaries but also followed Chaucer closely in his styles were Thomas Occleve, or we can say Hoccleve, who famously wrote the poems like The Governale of Princess, Occleve's Complaint, The Complaint of Our Lady, etc. Then there was a poet named John Barber who wrote a poem named The Bruce. Then we have a poet John Lydgate who wrote The Fall of Princes, The Temple of Glass, and Story of Thebes. And lastly, King James I of Scotland is also considered Chaucer's contemporary since he wrote The King's Squire, in Rhyme Royal. Now let us discuss Chaucer's influence on the 15th century Scottish literature. As I told you that Chaucer died in the year 1400, that is at the beginning of the 15th century, but there were certain Scottish poets who came later on, but they closely followed Chaucer and were inspired by Chaucer in writing their poetry. And all these Scottish poets were fondly called as Scottish Chaucerians because they so closely followed the style of Chaucer into their poetic framework. Now let us discuss who were these 15th century Scottish Chaucerians who were great admirers of Chaucer himself. There were 5 poets who were inspired by Chaucer. First is Robert Henryson, second William Dunbar, third Gavin Douglas, fourth Alexander Berkeley, and fifth Sir David Lindsay. Out of these, the first 3 are considered usually the most important Scottish Chaucerians, and a question usually comes in the exams about who is the Scottish Chaucerian amongst all these 4 choices. So that was all about the age of Chaucer. Now let us summarize the age of Chaucer. The age of Chaucer, spanning the late 14th to early 15th century, was a transformative period in English literature, culture, and society. There is a brief overview of its age. Let's understand. The key features: late Middle Ages, transition from medieval to early Renaissance values. Black Death, starting from 1348 and lasted up to 1350. It brought devastating pandemic, shaping social, economic, and cultural landscape of the entire England. Third was the rise of vernacular languages like English, French, and Italian. They emerged as literary languages during this period. Growing literacy, increased access to education and written materials. Courtly culture, chivalry, knighthood, and aristocratic values gained momentum in this time period. Let's understand the literary developments of the age of Chaucer. Emergence of Middle English. Chaucer's language, blending Old English, French, and Latin, gave rise to the emergence of Middle English. Influence of continental literature was also seen. Italian, French, and Latin works shaped the English literature. Third was the rise of poetry. There were many poets like Chaucer, Gower, and William Langland who dominated the literary scene during the age of Chaucer. Fourth is the development of genres. We saw the development of romance, allegory, and satire that emerged during this period. Let us see the historical context and historical overview of this period. This period was reigned by Edward III, and England saw its rise as a major power. There was also 100 years of war, and conflict with France shaped the English identity. There was peasants' revolt and social unrest which called for reforms during this period. Lollard's movement, or the Peasants' Revolt, is a religious dissent, and it was the precursor to Protestantism later on. Who were the notable figures during the age of Chaucer? There were many, which included Geoffrey Chaucer, John Gower, William Langland, John Wycliffe. What were the cultural achievements of this period? The first was the establishment of English language. Chaucer's works solidified English as a literary language. Second was the development of English literature. It laid the groundwork for the later literary movements in the ages to come. The third was the growth of education. It increased access to the learning and literacy. The fourth was the emergence of national identity. England began to assert its cultural and literary distinctiveness around Europe. The age of Chaucer was a pivotal moment in English literary history, marked by significant cultural, social, and literary transformations. So with this, I culminate the age of Chaucer for you. To better remember the key points of the age of Chaucer, it is always important for you to go for the quiz so that you can memorize the important points, and when it comes the exam time, you are confident enough to answer all the questions correctly. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.